Welcome to Something Positive for Positive People. I'm Courtney Brain. Something Positive for Positive People, the podcast, really features me interviewing people who are navigating herpes stigma, from people who were diagnosed, people who date people who have herpes, mental health professionals, therapists, sex therapists, public health professionals, anyone who can really give us insight to what it means to navigate the stigma of herpes so that we can get those perspectives and allow for ourselves to just see different sides of how people go through this so that you have the option to choose from in how you want to move forward through it. All right. Today's guest is Kit, and Kit uses they them pronouns. And Kit, I don't know if you have any other like introductions that you would want me to do. Uh, do you?
Um, I think that's a really good start. I'm queer, I'm polyamorous, so I've got kind of like quite a broad look on life,
Okay.
neurodivergent as well. So I think a lot of what I do is like stepping outside the binaries. So it's
Okay.
probably a good introduction.
Well, the accent. So where are you located?
So I'm in the Midlands in England.
Okay. All right.
So
Um, You said neurodivergent. That word has been surfacing a lot, or at least for me over the last year, and I don't think I had really heard it before. Can you tell me like what that means?
yeah, I think like it works as a good kind of catch-all for like a different lot of different kinds of neurodivergencies. So I think some of it kind of you can have things like ADHD, autism. I'm pretty sure
Oh,
PTSD comes under that. I think personality disorders come under that as well. So it's anything that really kind of like sets your neurotype as being divergent from what is typically seen as like the default or norm. But I think like it's becoming more and more apparent that a lot of us are neurodivergent, so maybe it's not as different as we think. For me, it catches that I have ADHD, I'm autistic, I have learning and processing difficulties, and I have CPTSD. So it's kind of, for me, it's a helpful way to kind of catch all of those things together, and then I can go into more detail if it comes to it.
okay. So it doesn't mean mentally ill or traumatized. It just encompasses like I don't want to use that phrasing if that's not what we're saying, because the way that you just described it, I think about how I would have referenced this in the past is like, oh, mental illness to some degree. Is that accurate or no?
I think it can they can align, and often you'll find like people may struggle with their mental health because of these reasons, because of being autistic or having ADHD or learning difficulties, and I don't know how much you know about CPTSD, but
That's
it's not a
complex.
great time.
Complex PTSD, right? Complex
Yeah,
post traumatic stress disorder.
yeah, that's
Okay.
correct.
I know a little bit about that, yeah.
Yeah, so you would like those are referred to as being neurodivergent, and but they kind of it isn't neurodivergent isn't necessarily like a synonym for like having mental health issues,
Okay.
but commonly if you're neurodivergent, you probably also do have like difficulties with your mental health, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Because I do notice that the people who have identified with being neurodivergent, uh, they require certain types of communication that works best for them. The ADHD thing, I knew someone who just couldn't be on time for anything. So my accommodation for that was tell you this time, knowing that I had an hour of wiggle room and maybe we'd get there a few minutes late. And that was just
Yeah,
how I chose to navigate that friendship.
yeah,
A friend of mine who has CPTSD as well. I know that certain conversations are, in fact, going to likely trigger this person, but I also know where they are in their healing process. So I can ask questions or have conversations in a way that guides it in a way that she's comfortable with. So yeah, I guess I see it as it's something that can be understood. It's just not, like you said, the default, right? So if I sit down and I have like a logical conversation with someone about a thing, the way that they hear things could be different than how I'm saying them, and vice versa. So I guess with people who are neurodivergent, like I guess I don't, it doesn't resonate for me. I know I learn better when I listen to a thing and I'm able to like see it in practice. Like if I see something happen a few times, I should be able to go and do it. And maybe some people need to sit and read. Some people may need to engage with it. Some people may need to be talked to about it. So,
Yeah.
all right, thank you for clarifying that for me.
You're welcome.
All right, so now that we've talked about everything but what we're here to talk about, um,
All connected in a way, isn't it? Almost sometimes.
yeah, I noticed that you have hobbies.
Yeah.
There is a particular hobby that I'm thinking of. The hula hoop. Do you do the hula hoop thing?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's me. Yeah.
What do you call it?
So hula hooping, but I kind of it extends to like a few different practices within that. So a lot of us call it like flow arts because it's very much about like flow state. Or some people refer to it. I think it depends on where your practice comes from and what you're where you're going with it. But it also kind of falls under circus arts as well.
Hmm.
So kind of yeah, big on the hula hoop though. It's my
Okay.
favorite one.
Does that help you at all with any neurodivergent things, like with having ADHD? I know that with ADHD, people tend to struggle with focusing on long tasks, and there's other things as well. But for you to you to have this hobby, I wonder is do you have this hobby because you have ADHD, or does having ADHD make having this hobby like helpful?
I think a bit of both really. Like myself and a lot of people I know with ADHD tend to have like quite a few almost like cyclical passionate sort of hobbies. So like you can come in and out of them quite frequently. So I find that with like the hoop and my other kind of like flow toys, but also arts and poetry and that sort of stuff. I'm kind of constantly cycling through things. So I think that adds to the passion because I also get like quite a lot of dopamine out of those sorts of things, which obviously like ADHD you're quite dopamine deficient, so you get quite a lot of dopamine out of those activities. It's something that I can then stick with for longer, and it's also like a really good kind of regulation tool, and like being able to express your emotions and kind of ground yourself. It's the sort of thing that like no matter how long it's been, like I always come back to it, and it's always something that whatever a state I'm in, it's a helpful thing, and it helps me feel free as well,
Yeah.
which is a really nice feeling.
That's a really good segue into speaking about herpes now, because one of the things that I talk to people about when they reach out is I try and remind them who they were before they got their diagnosis. I think it's important for us to be grounded and connected to what fueled us, what ignited us, and for so many people, sex is often what they look at. They're like, sex is what grounded me. Sex is how I connected with people. Sex, right?
Yeah,
But how you just identified, many you mentioned being queer, you mentioned being polyamorous. Uh, these were two things that were in the sex realm. You mentioned being neurodivergent, which I know that influences sexual relationships to whatever extents they do. But when we look at the importance of having a thing that you can come back to, you talked about like the dopamine that comes from it. Like these are all things that people can look at aside from, oh my god, I have herpes, my life is over, when really what they
yeah,
mean is that their sex life is just going to be influenced differently. So
yeah,
my first question would be, coming from, you have herpes as well.
yeah.
So hula hooping as an expression of your passion, creativity, getting dopamine. Can you talk to me about how this might compare to your relationship to sex at all?
Um, in a way, it's kind of almost currently the opposite of my relationship to sex in that it's something that I can kind of quite easily dip in and out of, and it's something that really fills my life up. The hobbies that I have, the hula hooping, the dancing, poetry, like just all sorts of kind of quite passionate things. I think I'm also very fortunate to have those things in my life because, unfortunately for me, like sex has been quite a difficult thing, especially over the past couple of years, kind of between mostly kind of related to trauma and stuff, really. So I've been quite kind of yeah, I guess fortunate to have all these other really enriching sort of things in my life. So it's a lot, I guess, easier for me to cope with having a disconnected relationship with sex. Although I definitely say that I miss it being one of those free sort of hobbies almost. Like I miss kind of anything sex related being something that's done freely, you know?
Did you call sex a hobby?
It was at one point.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll let you finish it. We can keep talking more about that because I find that what we look for through sex is something sometimes we can get in other ways. We just don't see it that way because we've only seen ourselves getting this sense of connectedness and satisfaction and all of those things because of and I don't even want to say sex, let's call it intercourse because that's typically what most people mean. I'm not going to be able to insert penis into vagina, and I think that that's where so much of the issue is this one-dimensional idea of what sex has to look like. So when you call it a hobby, like, hey, talk to me about that.
Well, it's something that I think, especially being queer and being non-monogamous and having kind of like that sort of approach to things, and also having trauma, like it's led me to kind of approach sex and intimacy in a very like broad sort of sense. Um, like you say, like the very kind of, I suppose, traditional like cis heteronormative sort of idea of sex is, yeah, penis and vagina, and there's a lot of people who get their idea of sex from mainstream porn at times, which can be a bit confusing. Um, so, as I'm sure you know, um, so sex as a hobby, I mean, if there's a couple sides to it for me, where I actually used to do like online sex work. So that was kind of like, webcamming and content creation and that sort of stuff. So at
Did
that time,
you
less of a hobby.
was it solo? Just for clarity, was it solo? Because I know there's a difference between camming and let me not say the language, but I know that there are different tiers, I guess, of online sex work. So the solo stuff or with partners, with penetration, those kinds of things. Are you comfortable with sharing like how in depth you got into it or no?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with
Okay.
that. Really, kind of, it's something that I feel passionately about, the idea of it being like destigmatized and it being a little bit more normalized. Really, um, if you can repeat the questions, my
Yeah.
ADHD is
The
just throwing all that information out my brain. So
no, because I guess I didn't really ask one aside from are you comfortable with talking about it, but did
yeah.
you have sex on camera?
Occasionally, I mean, for me it was more solo focused, but if there were times where I was seeing somebody and they could kind of be brought into it or we could do it together, there was appeal for that, because some people like to see two people together. But predominantly for me it was something that I quite enjoyed doing just myself, and kind of, yeah, like I started off doing kind of whatever came my way, basically. When you've got to make money, you've got to make money. And I was very, when you're new to it, I think you're possibly willing to take on quite a lot. But as time went on, I kind of found my own groove with things and figured out what I was comfortable with, what I wasn't, kind of, and more and more comfortable really in the kind of like BDSM and kink aspect of it, because that's something that I found actually quite healing at times. And I've actually found it quite like, it's very special and kind of very sacred to have somebody trust you with them in that sort of vulnerable way. So that's kind of where I ended up predominantly doing kind of solo kink sort of content, really.
Okay. So sex is a hobby. We're speaking outside of the context of exclusively intercourse because you mentioned kink and BDSM as well. And you mentioned having trauma as well. So how I know that it has, but how has kink and BDSM helped you through the trauma and the complexities of your existence and all of these different identities?
It's kind of had a few different, like from a few different angles, basically, where one is kind of helped to embrace that aspect of intimacy not having to have anything to do with genitals necessarily, which has helped me a lot. Things like sensory play and this idea of kind of being able to play with each other, and I like the word play as well, because we get a lot of people talk about foreplay, and that kind of, it suggests that it's only just to come before sex, but actually the idea of play is just you get to play with each other and play with each other's senses basically, and having that alongside, I'm kind of, I've not been in this position for a little while now. It's been a hot minute for me, but previously being in kind of scenes where I could be taken to quite an intense point with somebody that I was playing with, and the second I said this is too much for me or I need this to stop, it was over. And there was, being being cuddled and being looked after and being given whatever I needed, and all of this kind of idea of aftercare as well, and how healing that was to experience a situation where you could go through potentially like really degrading things, and then it's all fine and you're still kind of in, you brought that back down to reality and reminded that that's play and that's not like someone genuinely mistreating you. And I think that was quite a force for me taking my own power back in a way, and kind of realizing that I'm in control, or I should be in control, and anyone that's kind of worth spending that kind of intimate time with is going to keep the control in my hands. And it doesn't matter whether you're submitting or you're dominating, like there's always an element of control in the sub's hands. And that was something that was really quite like groundbreaking for me at the time that I experienced it, I think. So that really helped a lot. And then, like I say, the idea that you can really kind of, I don't know, like push people's buttons and have your buttons pushed, and none of this could all be done with your clothes on,
Yeah.
So that's been like a really powerful thing when it comes to like intimacy and sex for me.
I mean, I've seen, heard about people getting the shit beat out of them and loving it. And then being on the other side of it, beating the shit out of somebody and loving it. But with
Yeah,
that it's almost like there's always the escape pod to where you can end whatever is happening. If
yeah,
you are someone who's beating the shit out of somebody, something may even come up for you. They
yeah,
may respond in a certain way, regardless of how much pleasure they're experiencing, that can set you off. And when you're in that alarmed state, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whatever state whatever your reaction is to a traumatic event, you
yeah,
might check out and
yeah,
continue to go past the limits. Like so much harm can be done, but what the consciousness of coming into kink and BDSM in a way that's like, all right, I know that this is something I like. I know that this is something I don't like. I know that this is something I'm curious in, allows for you to connect with people who are capable of and willing to articulate what the mutual needs are or what the
yeah,
desires are, and be able to, like you said, play. Because
yeah,
there's a lot of needs that we have that are not just sexual needs, and pleasure is not exclusive to the use of genitals and orgasming. While that may be the consistent feeling of pleasure that we know, like I said, somebody getting the shit beat out of them may be like better than orgasm to them in terms of
yeah,
pleasure. Someone being tied up and left in a room to just sob endlessly, you might be like, "Oh my God, something's wrong with them. I need to save that person." But you leave them in there for the time that you agreed upon, and then you let them out. They're gonna be so fucking grateful and thankful.
yeah,
Like I ain't gonna talk about my personal experiences, but situations where there have been people where things have been done where I'm like, whoa, that was like, I thought I was hurting you. But in
yeah,
fact, it's I'm giving you pleasure. I thought that like me talking to you in this way would like make you cry in a way that might have made you want to go kill yourself. But in fact,
yeah,
it's like there is so much gratitude for a person to go through the process of vulnerably asking for a thing that they want that is probably not traditionally, what they would get. Like I'm used to sex, just intercourse, penetration. So when you come to me about some pleasure, I'm thinking sex. Like, oh yeah, I'm about to get my dick wet. but there's much more to it, and like the pleasure can come from maybe getting my dick wet, maybe keeping clothes on, right?
Yeah,
So there's all of this exploration to be done, and here's where I want to bring it back. That is not exclusively tied to our ability to merge genitals with another person. It
yeah,
goes so much more beyond that. And
yeah,
the whole thing with having herpes is that it doesn't restrict you from all of those things. I think that it sort of adjusts your knob a little bit to
yeah,
where you're able to look in a different direction that you otherwise may not have looked into for
yeah,
pleasure and for connecting with people.
yeah. It can definitely help you get a little bit more creative and kind of approach things a little bit differently. I'll
Yeah.
definitely I'll give it that. Like,
hmm this is a good point to plug our sponsor, Shameless Care, Shameless Healthcare. So if you go to the link that'll be in the episode notes, you can get a free, or not free, wow, you can get an at home STI test kit, because we're on the topic of kink and BDSM and non monogamy. People might be going into play parties or swingers events, and you'll want to know what your status is. So if you check out the link, you will see a link to Shameless Care slash SPFPP, or if you're listening and want to type it in, Shameless Care slash SPFPP. Or I'm sorry, shamelesscare.com slash SPFPP. You can tell I don't do this a lot. Like, I previously recorded podcast episodes for like 9 weeks out, and then I was approached by this podcast sponsor, and he recently asked. He was like, "Hey, how's the campaign going?" I was like, "Oh, I haven't been able to put an ad into a new podcast episode, but this is one of our sponsors. If you want to support something positive, you can order an online at home STI test kit. By the time this one goes out, for anyone who's listening, you'll also be able to get ED medication, erectile dysfunction medication. So you can use the code SPFPP for that too. And the podcast episode that we did, I forget which number it is, but if you want to learn more about how the ED medication is used, because I learned a few things as well, that some people show up to parties and they're maybe a little bit shy and they could just use a little, pop that little pill and get at it. But anyway, yeah, link will be in the episode notes, as well as you can use SPFPP at shamelesscare.com in order to support something positive for positive people and know what your status is. All right. You reached out to me originally to record this podcast episode about something completely different. I am so glad that we've been able to talk about what we have to this point. And honestly, like, I want to come back to it, but I want to
yeah,
make sure that you get to share the positive interactions that you mentioned that you were having lately. So I'll leave the floor open for you to share, and then I'll just jump in when you stop talking.
sounds good. So, yeah, it's been quite a bit of a journey. It kind of originally started, I want to say, I think it was mid 21. So it's been a couple of years, I suppose, already. But I was seeing somebody who was positively diagnosed, and I was polyamorous at the time. So you're kind of not only working out like what are you okay with, but potentially what are your other partners going to be okay with you kind of getting involved with other people, especially when it comes to things like herpes. Particularly as I'm not sure exactly what it's like over in America, but here they will not test you for it on the like sexual health services unless you have symptoms. So I was dating somebody who was positive, and at the time I was like, that's fine. I looked into it. I was just okay with just going forward with things as we were, basically, because I'd kind of seen the statistics, and it was a kind of moment of, well, it's quite common, really, and so many people have it and don't even know about it. I might already have it anyway. Kind of took it on board, and we carried on as we were. And I actually found out about my diagnosis when I had a slip up, and I was drunk and ended up sleeping with somebody, and I kind of woke up the next day like, oh, I didn't diagnose, and I didn't disclose even, and kind of really feeling really guilty about it, particularly as I've done so much to work on kind of consent and informed consent, and it's so important to me as an individual and within the communities that I've been in. I woke up there and I felt awful. I felt absolutely awful. But obviously I wasn't able to get tested because I didn't have any symptoms. So I actually ended up going to a private clinic and paying a fair bit of money to find out. And it turned out at the time that I did have herpes, but not the strain that the previous person I'd been with had. So I must have had it from some other point in my life. Um, and from there, I had one conversation with the person I'd slept with just at that point, and I was so nervous because it was the first time, and also, I felt super super guilty about not having had the conversation with him beforehand. So we had a conversation. Again, he was really good about it. He was really understanding and kind of really quite calm about the whole thing. And meanwhile, I'm like the other end of the phone, like jittering and shaking a little bit out of nervousness. And kind of, so I've come away from that, and I'm not been in that relationship anymore, and I've actually been taking a bit of a break for myself for healing reasons, and kind of trying to get as right with myself as I can at the moment. But after that, I've got a really good friend who things are quite ambiguous with us, and that's that's something we're going to have a conversation about soon, and he'll probably hear me talking about this when I send him the podcast. So all nice things to be said. But but we've got quite an ambiguous relationship, and we're working that out. And we've kind of like, it was kept pretty chill because I'm quite heavy in my CPTSD lately, so I wasn't really interested in getting intimate with anybody for a long time, and it took me a while to even be comfortable kind of having cuddles and stuff like that. So it's all been very, very slow, and he's been really, really kind of patient with me, which has gone a long way. But it got to a point eventually where we kind of been like fooling around a bit, and I had like messaged him when he left, kind of saying like, oh, I would have loved to have like made out and whatever, but can I talk to you about this basically if you've got a minute? And I had kind of taken on board a lot of the stuff that I'd seen on the Something Positive for Positive People Instagram around kind of like amazing resource, by the way, absolutely fantastic. And I'd taken a lot
They said it,
on
not
board.
me.
Yeah, it's true. Um, I'd taken like a lot on board, kind of somewhat by osmosis, almost like just taking in the posts, but this idea of like not being ashamed of it, it not being like a, oh, by the way, like I'm really sorry, but I've got this thing wrong with me, and like, will you still please love me, sort of thing. Like it's something that I see more and more of, like, yes, I have herpes, and yes, I'm hot. There's no like but or despite. It's like those two things can live alongside each other. And yep, when I spoke to him about it, and I gave him a little bit of info to go off, and said that he's obviously welcome to look into it for himself. And it was almost like a anticlimactic reaction. I was like, again, like a bit nervous, but trying to be strong and confident about it. And he was kind of like, yeah, basically it's fine. Like that's the one that's really common, right? So I probably have it, so it's all good. And it's kind of like, oh, all right, like I'm working myself up about all of this, but like the reactions so far have been like really kind of almost like subdued and positive. Um, so that was like, okay, my good first kind of like look into what it's like disclosing when I'm kind of in my bit more of like self-love era, trying not to apologize for myself, and trying to kind of like step into my power in life. And that was like, okay, cool. And I thought, do you know what? I don't have to worry about doing this very much because I'm trying to live my solo life at the moment. I'm trying to not get involved with anybody as it is. Um, until I recently kind of went to this like queer event, and it was like, it's like a camp out just full of like queer polyamorous people. Not everyone is, but it's kind of a lot are. And kind of again just like feeling really in my element. A lot of neurodivergent, disabled, like chronically ill, queer, polyamorous, like genderqueer, just like an absolute like fantastic place to be. And I kind of went there with very low expectations about getting involved with anybody, because I was like, no, I'm good. Like, I don't think I'm ready at the moment. Um,
Oh, I know where
and
this is going.
what's that?
I know where this is going.
Yeah. So I was wrong. Um, so um, so yeah, so I went there. I was kind of, yeah, low expectations. Like, it's chill. There were some 18 elements, like 18 plus elements to the event, but it was all, again, beautiful atmosphere to be in, especially as someone who's working through their trauma. Very consent focused. Consent workshops leading up to the event online. Consent workshops at the event. A
Kid,
lot of
how old are you?
26.
Oh, I gotta stop doing that. I keep assuming that everyone is like right around my age. All right.
um,
Consent workshops leading up to the
yeah.
event.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Um,
Well, when you
that's
said
alright.
18 plus, I was like 18 plus. I was like, oh, you're younger than
Yeah.
me.
And I think, like, because there were elements of the event that kids could go to, so they had to do, shout out to the team as well. Absolute shout out to the team running it, because they had to do so much work, not only just on this, but clearly on this, to keep areas separate and have certain rules and boundaries around, like, using certain areas. Making it so as many people as possible, age or not, like, you've got asexual people and or people who are traumatized, all sorts of people, all sorts of walks of life are going to want all sorts of things. So they worked really, really hard on that, which was amazing. So yeah, I went to that, and yeah, initially I'm thinking, like, yep, not gonna, I'm aware cuddle piles are a thing, but I'm not sure I'm ready, and I'm aware there's like non-sexual kink sessions, but, like, I'm just gonna keep it chill. And actually, like, I went, and the first kind of day or so, I was quite nervous, I was quite shy. People were really friendly, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna stay on the edge a little bit. Um, but it was just such an environment to be really, like, feeling welcome and just kind of feel a little bit free. And I kind of ended up like, they had non-sexual kink session in their 18 plus tent, and again, that's something that I've, like, almost taken a hiatus from. Kind of, I've been very kind of, yeah, disconnected from all that, and I I had, like, a really iconic moment where people, like, wanted Spanx, and so it kind of ended up with about 5 or 6 people lined up kind of at the end of the tent, like, butts in the air, and I'm having the time of my life, and giving out Spanx and stuff. Absolutely fantastic experience. But outside of that, like, there were a couple of times where people I'd interacted with, and you get those little flirty moments, but, like, a lot of us are queer and a lot of us are autistic, so trying to tell when someone's flirting with you or sending you signals is it's hard work. It really is. Like, it's so difficult. So I'm kind of, like, having these nice moments with people, and I'm like, I have no idea, like, what this means. um, and at one point someone comes up to me and says, like, this is an explicit, like, invitation to a cuddle pile later if you want to, or if you want to come for any cuddles, like, just so you know, this is explicit, because they'd overheard me saying, like, I need to be invited in like a vampire, because otherwise, like, I just won't know that someone's inviting me to something. So they invited me, and they also said, like, I can't remember how they phrased it exactly, but basically that they're open for some kisses, basically. And I said, like, that would be really nice, but there's something I'd like to talk about with you first, like, kind of before that. So I kind of, like, again, like, moving into this, like, non-apologetic, kind of more confident, just told them, like, I have HSV, I have herpes, I'd like to kiss you, but, like, I need you to know that first, and then you can make your own decisions based off of that. um, and at the time they had said, like, I'm not put off at all, let me just think about it a little bit, and kind of, there are also ways we can work around that, and there are things we can do differently if it comes to it, and this really nice approach of just, like, I feel like I'm being met in the middle, like, not kind of, I've had a lot of relationships where I'm admittedly probably a bit of my own problem, but dragging people by their heels a little bit. So being coming into contact with people who meet you halfway has been so refreshing. And so yeah, we had that conversation, and they gave me a few like kisses on the cheek instead, and you know, they said they'd have a little think about it. And um, there came another point where somebody else I was talking to had also said like, hey, I'm open for some. They were all calling it smooches, so that's kind of stuck with me now. But so hey, I'm open for some smooches if you are. And I said again, like, I'd like that, but I need to talk to you about something first before that happens. Um, and they were again like really, really like friendly and comforting about it. And we went away and we had a quick chat. And they were like, "Oh yeah, okay, that's fine." Like they've done stuff to do with like sexual health before, and they know quite a lot about it already from the sounds of it. And again, it was kind of almost like a anticlimactic moment of just them being fine with it and already having their own resources around that sort of stuff. And yeah, things went on, and I ended up getting a lot of kisses and cuddles, and it was like it was such a like queer polyamorous moment, kind of being in like a cuddle pile and having cuddles from both sides, and like loads of kisses and cuddles, and it's just like, wow, like this is what it can be like when you're around people who are quite like forward thinking about this sort of stuff, and they do their own kind of looking into it. And also like again going back to that living unapologetically sort of thing, and kind of trying to walk away a little bit from these feelings of guilt and shame that you typically might associate with STIs. It's been like a really quite a healing experience, and just so much of that has actually come from taking in the something positive for positive people resources, where it's like, yeah, this is not something that like I have to carry around like awful baggage. It's not something that's wrong with me. It's just something that's a part of me, and the right people will kind of work with me on it and find different ways to do things if that's what works for us. And seeing that happen like in real time has just been it's been amazing, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Thank you for that share. Thank you for the shout out too. What I'm hearing in this is that you had needs. You went into an environment where the potential for you getting your needs met was higher. And the odds of you asking for what you needed in that setting, that environment, and then getting it are significantly higher than if you were to ask for just smooches and cuddles at like a vanilla bar. Like if you were to go to a bar or club and meet someone that way, like you just want smooches and cuddles. Ew, like what's wrong with you? And for multiple people, that's gross. Ugh. But this same person would probably have sex with you without a condom in the bathroom,
Yep.
right? But what that speaks to is it's not enough to just ask for what you want. It's also a matter of also looking at where you're asking for it from, who you're asking for it from, because so many people I feel I've understood over time are like, no one's gonna want to have sex with me. I'm never gonna have sex again. I'm never going to be able to get a thing that I want. And I've seen that people, I'll share like, hey, you can go to this place and get what you want or ask for what you need. And people usually just don't. I don't have a real reason as to why, but the environment of where we make our ask is so important too.
Yeah.
Someone told me like, if you like anime, you need to go to anime conventions, and like that's gonna probably be where you meet someone with that compatibility. And I was like, wow. I mean, I've thought about it, but I don't know. Putting yourself out there in the situation to get what you want sometimes is scarier than just going through the process of being like, nope, what I want isn't out there. Because
Yep.
then you put yourself in position to, want what you want, ask for what you want, and then not potentially get it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. That makes sense, because you're stopping yourself before you start then, and that may like be getting in your own way sometimes, but also it reduces the potential to come into contact with rejection, I suppose. But then it also means that you've completely reduced your chances of coming into contact with acceptance as well, and the pleasure that could go with it. So it's definitely a double-edged sword, really, isn't it? Like that.
Big time, yeah. Um, all right. So we talked about your story. We talked a lot about identities, neurodivergence, kink, and BDSM, and I kind of want to go back to that. I kind of want to just go back to the kink BDSM part because I think that someone listening to this who might have been historically heterosexual, monogamous, may hear kink and BDSM and think exclusively, whatever their defaults are. And I want to point out how similar this is to herpes because before getting herpes, people probably had their own assumption about what it meant. So now, before stepping into the kink and BDSM space, people might have their own perceptions about what those people look like, what they do, who they are, and it's really not something you can ever understand until you have exposure to it. Same thing with herpes. Like, we have become experts at Google searching things about herpes.
Yeah,
And I think that it's the same, parallel with kink and BDSM. If it's something that you're interested in and curious about, then you can just start, you know, and allow for yourself to be curious and explore what the possibilities are that exist in that space.
yeah. No, absolutely. There's so much to it, and there's so many different ways that you can take it. Like I think typically, sometimes people from the outside looking in think, BDSM and kink is all about getting tied up and getting beat up, and that's the kind of like the pinnacle of it, really. Which can be great fun, um, but there's also kind of all these other elements to it that like it's about kind of learning a person, um, both kind of like learning yourself if you're kind of exploring what you're into, and also kind of from mostly from experience, but from like a kind of like a dominant sort of point of view, like learning other people and learning what makes them tick, and learning what pushes their buttons. Like it can be stuff that is so kind of simple almost, like we can overcomplicate what these ideas of kink and BDSM are in our head from the outside looking in, but actually when you're from the inside looking out, like it's it's so broad, such a broad spectrum, like being neurodivergent and like how you can approach, being herpes positive and how you can approach different ways of having sex and intimacy. It's the same with kink and BDSM really, and it's just figuring out what kind of pushes your buttons really, and then finding out the kind of the best frameworks to do that from within. Like the different kind of forms of like risk aware, consensual kink, and then God, there's quite a few acronyms that you can kind of approach it from the point of view of. So having educating yourself a little bit around the frameworks from within which you want to operate is always kind of advised, and you know consent's like a consistent practice. It's not something that you get once and someone says yes and then you have access to all of them all the time. So it's something that learning those things and practicing those things consistently can then kind of lead to experimenting and finding more, when you go into it. So it's yeah, it's a very playful thing to be able to do, I think.
Yeah, well, thank you. Um, I I think that we've touched on enough. And if people are more curious about kink and BDSM, then I invite you to visit www.spfpp.org. You can make a donation or you can join the Patreon page, and then you'll have access to more of this like in-depth stuff from like personal experiences and how kink and BDSM can be useful. You're also invited to go and just browse through the episodes or go through the social media posts as well, as kids said was useful to them. So those are options as well. But yeah, I think that this is a really good place for us to close out, wrap up. How are you feeling about this?
Feeling pretty good. It's been really nice to kind of talk about it with someone who, has the kind of outlook and the information and the knowledge and the experience that you do, and to kind of be able to talk about that together. It's been quite an enriching experience, actually. It's really, really, really nice.
Thank you. Thank you for reaching out and being willing to share your experience, kid. I appreciate you. And I didn't know you were 26. I thought you followed me for a while. Like I remember
Really?
the hula hoops like for at least pandemic maybe starting point.
That sounds about right, actually. I think I've been following
Okay.
you for quite a while now.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, I had no
Mm.
idea.
It's been a good journey.
Wow. Well, okay. Well, I'll let you go. I appreciate you being here. I can't say it enough. And then we'll touch base. I'll let you know when this is going to release. It'll be July when it's out.
Yeah, that's cool. That sounds good. Thank you. Thanks for holding space to have this conversation. It's been amazing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you.
Wicked. All right.
That
Well,
concludes this episode of Something Positive for Positive People. Please like, rate, review, share, subscribe to, and donate to Something Positive for Positive People. I am on social media at Courtney Brame underscore. So that's TikTok, which I loathe. And then it's also Instagram. You can support our efforts to continue to fight for the integration of these post diagnosis lived support experiences into STD prevention programs as well as sex education. That's really what my big focal points are. And again, go and check out the link in the show notes so that you can check out Shameless Care and you can get your at home free STI tests. Or I keep saying free. You can get your at home STI test. It is not free, all right? Let me stop doing that. All right, y'all. I'll catch y'all next time. Thank you.